Funding for Current Conversations is provided by University of Oklahoma President's Office, University of Oklahoma Outreach, and World Literature Today. Welcome to Current Conversations. I'm R.C. Davis-Indiano. Today we're going to be talking about LGBTQ milestones the young people encounter from their initial coming out to entering adulthood and entering lifelong relationships with a partner. We'll be talking about psychological, social, and even the legal dimensions of these life-defining moments. We'll have with us today Professor Joe Tsai, who is Presidential Professor of Law and Glenn R. Watson Centennial Professor in Law at the University of Oklahoma, and Casey Catlett, who is Assistant Director of LGBTQ and Health Programs at the University of Oklahoma. I'm imagining that our audience today is made up of parents or people who care about young folks who are going through difficult transitions. Casey, could we start with you? What does a young person go through as they're coming out, realizing who they are in terms of their gender orientation? Is it a process? Is it just a sudden revelation? What happens?
Well, when it comes to their sexual orientation, then it's typically a process that happens. Starts at a really early age, and most of the time at the beginning stages of it is through comparisons to their friends or family members, realizing that we're in a world that's very heteronormative, basically meaning that the assumption or that we're socialized as all being heterosexual. And so when you're not, and because we're not born with vocabulary, that you compare yourself to other people, realizing that, oh, I'm not like the other boys on the playground or like the other girls, or you see the binary with mom and dad or something like that, and that doesn't necessarily fit for you. So that first kind of process is realizing that I don't fit that heterosexual identity. So then what is my identity?
I would think too that a real difficulty is that the mom and dad who can jump in and help on almost everything else may not know a lot and have any firsthand experience. So that must be hard for the young man or woman to look to their parents and not get the support that so often is there, right?
Absolutely, and it really comes down to that, well, if I'm looked at or I feel different, so is there something wrong with me? And because I don't see representation or I don't know anybody else who feels the same way because it's not talked about, so if I go to mom and dad, are they going to be upset with me? Will something happen if I tell them this is how I feel, or there's something different about me?
Okay, so what can a mom or dad, or a good friend, somebody who cares about this young person, what are some best practices that you could tell us?
I think some of the best practices is silence is a message on its own. So if it's not talked about, then you're sending a message that it's taboo. So identifying as LGBTQ is taboo. So if you're having the conversation or you're recognizing that there are different types of sexual orientations, different types of family dynamics, things like that are out there, then it starts the conversation that it's very open and fluid. And so then they can recognize that, okay, this is a little bit like me, and I can kind of go off of that. And it allows the child to ask questions. And children are very curious and inquisitive, and so they're going to ask questions, but you have to give them that space to do so.
Casey, it's something I've got to ask you about because I know this comes up in various parts of the country, particularly very conservative communities. Conversion therapy, that's going to occur to a lot of parents. Oh, well, maybe I should get them in counseling and maybe be a little more aggressive and get them in conversion therapy, and that's going to somehow help get them going in the right direction.
The beginning piece of that is that you're assuming that there's something wrong with the child if they identify as LGBTQ, and that there needs to be some sort of conversion, and that's problematic. So, and then going further into that is that the American Psychiatric Association has already made a very staunch claim saying that it's very detrimental to individuals and it doesn't work. So there's no point in doing that. In fact, it's considered in a lot of large areas and communities that it's torture. And so by doing that, you're actually not fixing anything. You're causing more problems with mental health issues, suicidal ideation.
So if you want to make your son or daughter's life even more difficult, even more stressful, try to go to the conversion therapy way, and you're probably causing a lot of problems.
Absolutely.
legal issues? And I know we're talking about
Sure.
folks who are not of age of majority and they're in their parents' care, but what legal issues are pertinent at this age?
And that's exactly it, particularly when you're talking about conversion therapy, because as a constitutional matter, parents have a fundamental right to the care, to the upbringing, and the custody of their children. And as a result, we have Supreme Court cases that have said that parents can choose to educate them in public schools or in private schools. They can teach them English or teach them German. They can even teach them Klingon if they want to. They can raise them to be any religion or no religion.
Was Klingon really a court case?
No, it was
Okay,
not. No,
okay. You
the
made that up.
Trekkie in me just want to insert that. I've thought about that with my own kids. But the point being is that given that parents have this broad right and discretion to raise their kids however they want, the state really can only intervene if they can show by clear and convincing evidence that the parents are neglecting or abusing their children. And so that's why I think it's particularly important that we have these psychological and social groups coming in and calling conversion therapy for what it is, which is a form of psychological and emotional abuse.
But it would take an adult advocate to get involved. I mean, a child might contact the state or whatever, but that's not very...
That's right. Just as with sexual abuse, just as with physical abuse, it would have to be a parent, it would have to be a teacher, a social worker, or someone else who would raise this issue with the state, and the state would have to have the willingness to come in and to advocate on the best interest of the child.
I bet that doesn't happen very often, because that's got to be a difficult decision for somebody who's outside of family, and they're considering crossing that line and making it their business and intervening. Yes. That's got to be really tough.
And not only is it a tough legal battle, but then it's, boy, putting the child in the middle.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, we've got this young person past the coming out stage. Okay, the person's still pretty young. They're in school, and you discover that your son or daughter is being bullied or in some ways being mistreated in relation to being LGBTQ.
Oftentimes, and we're seeing a cultural shift now, but even at the age of being in K-12, that they're not officially, or they haven't self-identified yet. And so a lot of bullying comes from perceived and actual sexual identity.
So the parents got to try to sort out what's actually happening, what might be just perception.
Absolutely, and it could very much be perception where bullying comes into play. So if you're seeing where, signs where the child does not feel the most authentically themselves, if there's issues that come into play where grades are dropping, things like that, that might be a factor. I'm not saying that's a factor for all students or all children, but that is a common thing. So when recognizing that if the child isn't feeling authentically themselves, then that's going to be a big piece of it.
You know, I'm a parent, and you just always debate with yourself, should I jump in? Am I going to look like a helicopter parent if I do this, or should I stay back and let things just work out? I mean, what's the best advice for a parent when they think there might be? Should they just jump in a little bit and get more information? Or?
Well, anytime that there's discrimination policies or discrimination towards a student, then you want to jump in because we would like to think that all administration and teachers are going to be perfect and always advocate for the child in that situation. But we know that there's a lot of homonegativity that's out there, even within the school districts towards LGBTQ identified students. So if the parents can advocate for their children, then that's always a good place to go.
Joe, I just have an inkling here that the law is getting a little more pertinent as we go along. I mean, what can you say on the legal side?
Oh, I think so. Schools generally have a duty to protect and to keep kids safe, and that's against bullying, whether it's on the basis of race, on the basis of gender, and now on the basis of sexual orientation. School administrators cannot make that distinction to allow kids to be beat up for one reason, but not for another reason. And so I do think here that the law can provide that protection for the kids. But again, I mean, you don't want to get into the situation where the law is your first rather than your last resort. You hope to put the child in a safe place where they can feel welcome and where people around them can support them, rather than to come in after the fact with the lawyers.
But in an extreme situation, the fact is there's liability the school has, and there's some real legal remedies here.
You can proactively educate the school administration and the school board that, hey, look, you have a duty to protect all of your students, and here are some of the policies and best practices around the country for doing that. And there are national groups as well as statewide and local groups that will provide you, with these best practices and policies and programs to provide the kind of tolerant environment and protective environment where LGBTQ students feel that they're safe, and if they have problems, that they're are avenues that there are people they can go to, there are places they can go to for support and for assistance.
I know that it's a dramatic step for people very often to go to a lawyer. They're afraid that they'll set in motion a legal process that once it's happening, it's really hard to sometimes stop it. Are there interim people where somebody could go and seek some kind of remedy, somebody that could mediate, maybe speak with the legal folks and speak with the school and speak with the parents and work out something that's short of ending up in court?
Oh, I think drawing in LGBTQ groups around the state or in the local area and getting them to help educate the administrators and the school board is a good first step. I think getting other parents involved as well, because ultimately the school administration is responsible to the school board and the school board is responsible to the parents.
Yeah.
And so I think a good first step is just to educate and make the school board and the administration aware of these issues and of the potential legal problems down the road in order to avoid them.
Isn't it true, though, and I think I've seen this, that sometimes lawyers really can be very effective doing that. You know, there are lawyers who aren't just trying to go to court, and they can step in and say, look, we've got some concerns here. You don't want to end up in court. Let's talk. Let's work this out. So a skillful lawyer could be that intermediate person as well.
Oh,
right?
certainly. And Atticus Finch is not just not just someone who's effective in court, but someone who avoids getting into court. And I think nowadays, given the crunch in school budgets and given concerns about lawsuits and the kind of reaction they would engender across the country, I think any sensible school administration would want to proactively solve these problems.
Okay, so we've got a somewhat older person now. Maybe is gone off to college or is in a work environment and is having trouble, I'm thinking kind of a spectrum here. Maybe it's a chilly environment where they just don't feel accepted or they just haven't been able to, at the other side, pull a support group together. Thoughts about that situation?
Well, and that's the important piece to remember is that the coming out process is not a one-time moment. It's an ongoing thing, especially when, in a world where, again, heteronormative, that in any new situation, you're going to inevitably have to come out. So when you're in a new environment like that, then you kind of have to feel out the landscape or the cultural environment of that area, and then find, which we do in all aspects, find individuals that you feel comfortable with, that you can, confidentially share that information, and so that there is support there, that you're not in a place that it could be hostile.
Is maybe the advice for a parent to not, try not to cross that line where you become a helicopter parent where you're just involved with everything. But I think you're saying stay connected. Absolutely.
And this is a huge piece of it going into college, that now we're seeing a trend where students are coming out earlier and earlier before they even step on college campuses, which has not been the case historically, where they've waited till college or even after college to come out. So that changes the whole landscape of a university or any kind of higher education institution, where what are we doing, how do we look from the outside in to parents and also potential students who are coming in? Are we LGBTQ friendly? Are we welcoming and affirming? Do we have programs? Do we have advocacy? Do we have education? Is there a sense of community? And that's what students are looking at.
Casey, of the three situations we've talked about so far, the coming out, being bullied, and then finding a community as an adult, where's the higher percentage of issues coming up?
Well, there are going to be different types of issues that in each situation. I would say at the beginning piece of it is the understanding, knowing thyself and self-identification is going to cause a lot of potential issues, because that will lead into future issues. If you're not in an affirming place, whether it's in the household or sense of community, then you're going to grow up with a sense of kind of self-shaming, loathing, things like that, which will cause a lot of mental health issues growing up, individual shaming, which then will infiltrate into the schools and being bullied and how you're perceived, to then finding community. And so if you don't have that comfort level or that support, then it makes navigating the rest of it very difficult.
Joe, is this a more ambiguous area for the law? Because it's not, being bullied in some instances be black or white.
Right.
Here we're talking about community, really, finding community.
Right, and here the law is definitely behind the times. We have laws that prohibit private discrimination, at least in the workplace and out in public, on the basis of race, on the basis of religion, on the basis of gender, on the basis of national origin, but not on the basis of sexual orientation. And so, it's ironic that even though we now have the ability for gays and lesbians to get married as a constitutional matter, they can still be fired for it, just as a matter of private employment. And so the law is definitely behind the times, and the situation is ambiguous because there are laws in place that, as I mentioned, provide for discrimination protection against gender. And I think one of the next legal fronts that will have to be litigated is whether or not gender discrimination qualifies as sexual orientation discrimination.
Wouldn't it be freedom of association issues here that make it kind of a murky area? How do you advocate for someone without stepping on somebody else's rights?
Well, what makes it murky is that the Constitution provides protections against the government. It protects against tyranny, but it doesn't protect against your neighbor or against your employer if your employer is a private employer. And so I think in this arena, really, it's less the law, but it's more hearts and minds that need to be influenced. You can use the law in some instances, for example, when you're regulating a business that serves the public. Then you can require that they not discriminate, and then it's a choice in the community whether or not to do so. But the community is not going to extend that protection to LGBTQ people unless they believe that these people are us; they're part of our community. And
so the law can't always lead the way. You're saying this really might be a social, cultural issue that.
Yes,
okay.
I think so.
So we've got a son or daughter who's now probably about to graduate, maybe through college, is entering potentially a lifelong relationship with a partner. What can their friends do to be supportive, to understand what's going on with them, be insightful about what they're going through?
I think language is important. So when you're talking about relationships or intimacy within LGBTQ, is that there are no social scripts yet, and there's a huge kind of cultural shift within the LGBTQ community, specifically with marriage equality being law of the land now, because everything is scripted. Every kind of heterosexual or straight kind of relationship is typically scripted. I'm not saying this is accurate or reality for everyone.
What do you mean scripted? I'm not sure.
Well, so traditional scripts that the man asks the woman out or the man proposes to the woman. Weddings are very scripted with kind of a binary gender identity. And so when LGBTQ identity or individuals come into play, then the scripts kind of become murky. Is that now you've got potentially two men in a wedding, or what happens when who asks the guy on the date, or when there's two men, or who pays for the date.
So what do you do practically? Do you just find hopefully you've got a community of people who've gone through taken some of these steps and just ask them?
Well, that's the thing. That's where the cultural shift is going to come into play. So we either have to adopt heteronormative scripts or we create our own. And so even within the areas of marriage equality, there are some people within the LGBTQ community that don't feel like they need marriage equality because it's a straight institution, and so that's we're going to have a flux there. So even within the community, there's a lot of kind of discourse as well.
But on the other hand, marriage provides a lot of benefits and protections that are important
legally,
to the couples and to their kids. And so even though it may have arisen as a heterosexual institution, it's important as a legal matter to ensure that those protections extend to those couples and their kids if they choose to adopt kids or have kids.
Yeah. So then the social side of it is that what are the scripts moving forward as far as dating and relationships and conversations with friends, and that so whenever you're in a work environment, recognizing that you can still be fired for identifying as LGBTQ, but then what if during marriage equality being the law of the land, you get married, but you don't feel comfortable having a wedding photo on your desk that is typically associated maybe with a straight individual at work, or asking questions, well, what did you do for the weekend? Well, my husband or my partner or whatever. So it kind of causes some problems there. And then so that you're outing yourself in the sense of in every new environment, work environment or community.
I never really thought of what you said before about scripts, but I would think that the lack of a script, which can be so affirming to people, would create a couple of responses that would be difficult. On the one hand, the folks around you who don't know how to respond, and they just don't. You're just invisible. As though you're being engaged or whatever just isn't happening. And then the folks on the other hand who want to get involved, but they've stereotyped you or locked you into something, and they think they know what's going on, and they project that onto you, and that's got to be really painful too.
It is, absolutely. And so then again, it goes into the, well, what are my options, and what is the community going to do, and do I adhere to the community or do I do my own? And so not having a script can be scary because it's like this sense of fear of freedom, and then because we haven't had it before, and then, or it's, okay, I've latched onto it, and this is how it's going to be for me.
Okay, what's the legal landscape? I think we all have kind of an inkling of this, but how would you, what's the legal landscape on civil unions and same-sex marriage?
Well, the Supreme Court has clearly affirmed that there's a constitutional basis for gays and lesbians to marry, and so as a result, they can get married anywhere in the country, and their marriages must be recognized everywhere in the country. But the Supreme Court and lower courts have not sorted out all these subsidiary issues that could flow from that, including, well, what about divorces? Is there a fundamental right to that as well? What about the rights of the children that are involved? And of course, the big elephant in the room is private discrimination. You can go over to the courthouse and get married and then cross the street and get fired or not get served. And those issues will need to be sorted out, I think, first socially before they get sorted out in the courts, if they need to eventually go to the courts, and hopefully they won't.
Aren't there pockets around the country still, though, even after the Supreme Court ruling, where the folks in the state house or whatever, where you get a license, they're just not going to cooperate, or they're going to be passive aggressive about it?
Just a couple of years ago, there was a judge in Louisiana who refused to marry an interracial couple, right? So you're going to get pockets of resistance like that around the country, I think, for a long time. But I think remarkably, at least with marriage equality, most of the majority of the country, I think, has started to accept, if not embrace, the fact that marriage equality is right as a moral matter, if not also as a constitutional matter. And hopefully we'll see the same tide turning quickly with not just respect to marriage, but also with respect to how we treat one another.
It sounds like you're counseling patients. In other words, the law of the land is what it is, and now we're going to go through that process of social reequilibration. There's a new reality, and it's not going to happen overnight. But
I think there's a legal component to that too, which is that instead of litigating these rights in court, why don't we go to our neighbors, our friends, and as well as our legislators. For example, in Norman, I think there's a movement now for the city council to recognize that our current protections on gender discrimination should be interpreted to protect LGBTQ. And I think if anyone here in the community cares about equality, both in the public sphere as well as in the private sphere for their friends and families, they should attend those meetings.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Prognostication time. Okay, Joe, I'm going to turn to you first.
Yes.
What's going to happen? Because you're a fearless person and can tell us what's going to happen. What's going to happen over the next 3 to 5 years in the legal realm that will have an impact on this community? Either something working its way through the courts now, or something you think will be litigated later. What do you predict?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of litigation, like the Kim Davis litigation, over whether or not public officials will actually have to do their duty and provide equal treatment to same-sex couples and even to people who are LGBTQ who are not seeking to get married. And I think the answer is going to be swift, and the answer is going to be uniform, and the answer is going to be yes, they do. Everyone's entitled to be treated equally, at least with respect to public services and public benefits.
Is this something that might make its way up to appellate courts just to sort of reaffirm what we already know, but it's not going to go to the Supreme Court because they would never need to take that?
I think so, because the Supreme Court was so forceful and affirming in its marriage equality decision that you cannot but read the writing on the wall that the guarantee of equal protection in the 14th Amendment that was originally adopted to protect against racial discrimination is great enough to extend protection to LGBTQ people now.
And if this conservative Supreme Court would affirm it that strongly, you know that's resounding.
Right.
Okay. Prognostication. What's going to happen socially, culturally over the next 3 to 5 years that you think will change the community?
Well, I think with a lot of the legal things that are going on, anytime that you have progress legally, you're going to have backlash socially. And so that's where I kind of in the middle with my pessimism and optimism. So we're seeing a huge surge in that backlash, and now, especially with marriage equality, but where we're seeing, a lot of bullying, a lot of anti-transgender people, individuals, people of color, trans people of color, queer people of color who are being murdered, and the harassment there that goes with that. We're also seeing a lot of teen homelessness with LGBTQ. So we're seeing a lot of negative things that that we're going to have to approach and we're going to have to address. But I think we're also going to see...
How do you see that being addressed?
I see it, well, legally, but then I also see it by resources that are available. That resources where that maybe have focused on large part on marriage equality are going to re-examine their focus now. And so we'll hopefully kind of tackle those other issues that are out there. And not looking at them as a ranking that, now that we've got marriage equality being number one, which for some people it's not number one,
right,
that we're looking at it as a whole, that there are a lot of other issues going on. But then you're also going to see, talking about the scripts, and where culturally, where community is going to form, and we're going to have scripts that are going to be developed when it comes to raising children, even as LGBTQ parents, and you're having raising children to adoptions and socially.
Casey, I've got a last question for you. Let's say that somebody listens to this discussion who's a parent, and they just kind of intuitively feel they're on the wrong side of this issue. They're not supportive in the way they want to be for this young person that they love, but they're just not there on the kind of answers that we've talked about today. What's your best advice for this person? What would you say to them?
I think in any situation, education is always going to be my number one best advice. To find resources, to find people that you can talk to, because you're not going to be the only one that feels that way. And it takes time. Just as it takes time for individuals who identify within the LGBTQ spectrum, finding their identity and then self-identifying, it also takes time for those who love those who identify to kind of get on board and to understand. So reaching out to local resources or national resources to find that education. I also think to kind of check what are the things that are the most the issues for yourself, and kind of reflecting on those and dealing with that.
Guys, very helpful answers to some important questions.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I'm especially glad that you could be with us today. Please join us next time for more Current Conversation. Thank you for watching.